In 1890, a man wrote the book that secretly explains you, why you keep repeating the same habit, why your emotions arrive after you act, not before, why your self changes depending on who's watching. You've felt all 9 of these truths. You just never had the words for them. Lesson 9. Habit shapes destiny. James believed habit was not a minor detail of human life. It was the single greatest force governing it. He called habit the enormous flywheel of society, the invisible mechanism that keeps a person moving in one direction long after the original motivation has disappeared. Every action you repeat carves a small groove into your nervous system, and over time, those grooves become the paths of least resistance. You don't decide who you are one grand moment at a time. You decide it in 1,000 invisible repetitions: how you wake up, how you speak to yourself, how you respond to discomfort. James warned that most people sleepwalk through this process, unaware that their character is being built brick by actions too small to notice. But here's the unsettling part. If habit built you without your permission, it means you were never really choosing freely until the moment you saw the mechanism. Once you see it, you gain something rare: the ability to consciously redirect the flywheel, one repetition at a time, before it locks you into a version of yourself you never intended to become. Lesson 8. Attention creates reality. James made a claim that still feels radical. Your conscious experience is not the world as it is. It is the world as your attention selects it to be. At every second, an overwhelming flood of sensory information is available to you, and your mind ruthlessly filters almost all of it out. What remains, what you actually experience, is only what you chose, consciously or not, to attend to. 2 people can stand in the same room and live in 2 entirely different realities simply because their attention was pointed at different things. This means reality for you is not fixed. It is authored moment by where your focus lands. James saw this not as a flaw in human perception, but as its defining feature. The mind isn't a passive mirror, it's an active editor, and that editor has enormous consequences. If you spend your attention on threat, your world becomes threatening. If you spend it on possibility, your world reorganizes around possibility. You are not simply observing your life, you are, quite literally, constructing it, one act of attention at a time. Lesson 7. Consciousness is a stream, not a sequence of parts. Before James, psychologists tried to break the mind into discrete building blocks, separate sensations stacked like bricks. James rejected this completely. He argued that consciousness doesn't come in pieces at all. It flows. He gave us the phrase that would echo through literature and philosophy for the next century: the stream of consciousness. Your mind, in every waking moment, is a continuous moving current, thoughts blending into feelings, feelings blending into memories, without clean borders between them. Try to isolate a single pure thought, disconnected from everything around it, and you'll find it's impossible. Every thought carries the residue of the one before it, and quietly shapes the one that follows. This means your mind is never truly starting fresh. It's always mid-river, always in motion, always connected to its own history. Understanding this changes how you relate to difficult mental states. A dark thought is not a fixed block lodged inside you. It's a current, and currents by nature move on, whether you fight them or not. Lesson 6. The self has multiple layers. James didn't believe in a single, unified you. He proposed that the self is layered, built from at least 3 distinct dimensions. First, the material self, your body, your possessions, everything you call mine. Second, the social self, the version of you that exists only in the recognition of others, how you are seen, spoken to, remembered. Third, the spiritual self, your inner world of values, thought, and moral judgment, the quiet observer behind everything else. These layers don't always agree. Your material self might crave comfort, while your spiritual self demands discipline. Your social self might chase approval, while your spiritual self already knows the cost. Much of human suffering, James suggested, comes from these layers pulling against one another without you ever noticing the war happening beneath the surface. Once you can name which self is speaking, the one hungry for possessions, the one hungry for approval, or the one that answers to something quieter and deeper, you gain the ability to choose which one gets to lead. Lesson 5. You have as many social selves as people who know you. This is where James becomes almost prophetic. He argued that you don't have one social identity. You have as many as there are people who hold an image of you in their mind. You are one person with your parents, another with your closest friend, another entirely at work, and someone else again with strangers. This isn't dishonesty. It's the natural architecture of identity. Because the self, for James, is partly relational, shaped in the space between you and whoever is observing you. Long before social media multiplied this phenomenon 1,000 times over, James had already mapped its logic. And this raises an unsettling question. If your identity shifts, depending on who's watching, which version is the real you? James's answer is quietly liberating. There may not be one true self hiding beneath all the others. There may simply be many honest expressions of the same underlying person, each one legitimate in its own context, none of them the sole, authoritative truth. Lesson 4. Emotion follows action, not the other way around. Here is the lesson that unsettles people the most. Common sense tells us we cry because we feel sad. We tremble because we feel afraid. We smile because we feel happy. James turned this completely backward. He proposed that the bodily response comes first, and the emotion is what we feel afterward, as our mind interprets what the body is already doing. We don't cry because we're sad. We become sad in part because we're crying. We don't run because we're afraid. We register fear because we're already running. This means emotion is not purely a top-down command from your mind to your body. It's a feedback loop, and the body has more influence over it than you've ever been taught to believe. The implication is enormous. If you deliberately change your physical state, your posture, your breath, your expression, you're not just performing an emotion, you may actually be manufacturing it. James handed us, over a century early, the theoretical seed of everything modern behavioral science now confirms about the body's power over the mind. Lesson 3. The perception of time is subjective and trainable. James observed something we now take for granted, but rarely question. Time does not feel the same in every moment, even though the clock never changes. A single hour of fear can feel infinite. A single hour of joy can vanish instantly. He argued that your mind doesn't measure time mathematically. It measures it through the density of experience. A period filled with novel, vivid moments stretches your sense of time. A period of dull repetition compresses it, collapsing entire days into a forgettable blur. This is why childhood summers felt endless, and why adult years seem to accelerate with every passing decade. Your mind is simply logging fewer new, distinct moments to measure them by. But James's real insight goes further. Because this perception is built by attention and novelty, it can be deliberately reshaped. Seek out new experiences, and your internal clock slows. Let life become automatic, and it silently speeds away from you. Time, in other words, isn't only something you experience, it's something you can, to a real degree, architect. Lesson 2. Free will begins with the choice of attention. For James, the entire philosophical battlefield of free will comes down to one deceptively small act, where you choose to place your attention. He believed that even amid overwhelming mental chaos, competing impulses, intrusive thoughts, conflicting desires, there remains one genuinely free gesture available to a human mind, the decision to hold your focus on one thing rather than another. This is not a grand, dramatic act of willpower. It's quiet, repeated, and almost invisible, and that's exactly why it's so easily lost. Every time your attention drifts and you pull it back, you are exercising the closest thing to true freedom that James believed a mind possesses. This reframes the entire question of self-control. You may not be able to choose your first impulse, your first fear, your first craving, but you can choose, again and again, what you keep looking at. And according to James, that single repeatable choice is the seed from which every other freedom in your life eventually grows. Lesson 1. The human mind is built for action, not just thought. And now, the final and most defining lesson of the entire book. James believed that consciousness did not evolve so that you could sit quietly and contemplate existence. It evolved to guide behavior, to help a living creature act, adapt, and survive in a changing world. Thought, in his view, is not the destination. It is a tool built for movement. Every perception, memory, and emotion exists ultimately in service of the next action you're about to take. This is why endless overthinking so often feels unbearable. You are using a system designed for motion and forcing it to sit still. James believed the mind finds its natural relief, not in more analysis, but in action itself. When you're overwhelmed, Thinking harder rarely saves you. Moving does. Deciding does. Acting, even imperfectly, aligns your consciousness with the very function it was built for. In the end, James leaves us with a quiet but demanding truth. Understanding your mind was never the final goal. Using it was. One book, and a mind you may never look at the same way again. William James didn't just study consciousness from a distance. He handed you a working manual for it. Your habits, your attention, your many selves, your sense of time, your freedom, all traced back to mechanisms you can actually observe, and in many cases, actually change. If this reshaped how you think about your own mind, subscribe, because there are far more ideas like this waiting to be uncovered. And tell me, which of these 9 lessons hit you the hardest? Write it in the comments. I read every single one.